She fought to resist, but the storm in her employer's eyes threatened to drown her resolve, a forbidden pull awakening feelings she never imagined. Hello, amazing viewers. I'm Morgan, your storyteller. Welcome. If you crave romance that defies boundaries, love that heals hidden wounds, and the transformative power of unexpected connection, you're in the right place. This is a soul-stirring journey of two fractured hearts finding light in the shadows of a windswept manor. Trust me, you'll want to experience every moment of this emotional odyssey. Subscribe now, and let's uncover this unforgettable story of love's daring rebirth together. Chapter 1. The silence of Stonehaven had shifted. It was no longer the deep frozen hush of a mausoleum, but a quieter, waiting stillness, the breath held before a word is spoken. Alistair Thorne felt it like a physical pressure in his chest as he stood at the window of his study, the relentless grey of the Cornish sea blurring the horizon. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old paper was now undercut, persistently, by something else, the faint, sweet drift of jasmine tea. Celeste, her presence, barely 3 weeks old, was already an insistent warmth against the stone-cold austerity he'd cultivated for 5 years. It was in the stray shaft of sunlight catching dust motes, where heavy velvet curtains had been defiantly pulled back. It was in the faint, melodic hum drifting occasionally from the kitchen, a sound so alien it made his nerves prickle. It was in the vibrant splash of color, Lily's discarded crayon drawing of a smiling sun, pinned against all protocol to the ancient oak paneling near the door by an equally defiant small hand. He traced the rim of his cold, untouched coffee cup. Betrayal. The word echoed in the hollow space Elena's death had carved within him. He'd promised her memory, promised himself that Stonehaven would remain a monument to their love, a fortress against the messy, painful intrusion of the living. And now he'd invited sunshine into the crypt. Worse, he craved it. The guilt was a physical weight, a lodestone dragging him towards the memory of Elena's pale face, her fading smile. Yet the image that surfaced, unbidden and sharp, was Celeste's face tilted towards the weak morning light, filtering through the conservatory windows yesterday. Her eyes closed, a small contented sigh escaping her lips as she sipped her tea. The simple aliveness of her had struck him like a blow. He turned abruptly from the window, the movement sharp. His gaze swept the room, landing not on the meticulously ordered financial reports, but on the book lying open on the armchair by the cold fireplace. Wuthering Heights, Celeste's book. He'd seen her reading it there yesterday evening after Lily was asleep, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration, the firelight catching the gold in her otherwise dark hair. He walked over, drawn against his will. His fingers hovered above the worn cover, then touched the spine, tracing the indentations. He could almost feel the residual warmth of her hands, a phantom heat that seeped into his cold fingertips. Ghosts. He was communing with ghosts. Elena's absence a constant ache, Celeste's presence a haunting of a different, terrifyingly vibrant kind. He snatched his hand back, shoving it into his pocket. This was weakness. This was the erosion of control he couldn't afford. Stonehaven demanded strength, demanded the icy focus that had rebuilt his empire from the ashes of grief. Celeste's purity, her uncomplicated kindness towards Lily, was a balm, yes, but also a vulnerability, a chink in the armor he needed to protect them all. If he allowed himself to need her, the thought was a precipice. The scent of earth and damp stone intensified as Celeste pushed open the heavy door to the walled garden. It had been neglected for years, a tangle of brambles and skeletal rose bushes beneath the high granite walls. But Lily, enchanted by the idea of a secret garden, had begged to explore, and Celeste, needing air, needing space away from the pervasive melancholy of the house and the unnerving intensity of Alistair Thorne, had readily agreed. "Look, Miss Hayes, a snail." Lily's voice, bright and clear, shattered the garden's silence. She crouched near a crumbling stone bench, her small finger pointing delicately. Celeste smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "A brave explorer, navigating the jungle," she said, joining the child. "Shall we leave him to his adventures?" Lily nodded solemnly. "He might be going to a ball. Do snails have balls?" A startled laugh escaped Celeste, perhaps very slow, slimy ones. She tucked a stray strand of Lily's dark hair behind her ear. The child's resemblance to her father was striking, the same intense dark eyes, the same serious set to the mouth when thoughtful. But Lily's eyes held a light. Alistair's seemed determined to extinguish. "What shall we explore next?" "The rose arbor. It looks like it might have been grand once." As they wandered deeper into the overgrown space, Celeste felt the familiar prickle of awareness. She turned. Alistair stood framed in the garden doorway, backlit by the weak sun filtering through the house windows. He wore his customary dark suit, an immovable monolith against the burgeoning chaos of the garden. He didn't move, simply observed them, his expression unreadable from this distance. Yet Celeste felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. It was unnerving, this silent scrutiny. Was he assessing her suitability, judging her interaction with his daughter? Or was it something else? The memory of finding his cashmere sweater draped over the back of the chair where she'd been reading last night surfaced. It hadn't been there before. Had he placed it? Had he lingered? She forced her attention back to Lily, pointing out a stubborn cluster of snowdrops pushing through the frost-hardened earth near the base of the wall. "Look, Lily, life finding a way. Like us in this big house?" Lily asked, her small hand slipping into Celeste's. Celeste's breath hitched. "Yes, darling, exactly like us." She squeezed the small hand, her gaze flickering back to the doorway. Alistair was gone, leaving only the shadowed arch. But the scent of him, sandalwood, sea salt, and something indefinably crisp, seemed to linger in the cool air, a quiet, disconcerting invasion of the garden's earthy sanctuary. The conservatory was Celeste's refuge, glass and wrought iron. It jutted out from the south wing, catching the best of the day's weak sunlight. Neglect had left its panes grimy, the air thick and stagnant, but Celeste had claimed it. She'd scrubbed the glass until it gleamed, swept away years of dust and dead leaves, and brought in a small rickety table and 2 chairs rescued from an attic. Her jasmine tea plant sat proudly on the table, its delicate white stars releasing their sweet perfume into the revitalized space. Sunlight, weak but genuine, streamed in, warming the flagstones. This was where she planned lessons, wrote letters home, carefully edited versions, and simply breathed. She was there now, attempting to sketch the intricate veins of a leaf she'd found in the garden, the quiet punctuated only by the scratch of her pencil and the distant cry of gulls. The door clicked open. She didn't need to look up to know it was him. The air changed, thickened with the scent of sandalwood and salt, and an undercurrent of tension. "Miss Hayes." His voice was its usual low baritone, cool and precise. "Mr. Thorne." She kept her eyes on her sketch, her pencil moving steadily. "Lily is with Mrs. Penhaligon in the kitchen, learning the mysteries of shortbread. I didn't come seeking Lily." He stepped further into the conservatory, his polished shoes silent on the stone floor. He surveyed the space, his gaze lingering on the clean glass, the thriving jasmine, the splash of color from a small, cheap pot of violets she'd bought in the village. "You've been industrious." It was rather gloomy, she replied lightly, finally looking up. He stood near her table, tall and imposing, his dark eyes fixed on her sketchbook. The sunlight caught the silver threading through his temples, the sharp line of his jaw. "Sunlight is good for the soul, and for plants." She gestured to the jasmine. "Stonehaven has managed without excessive sunlight for quite some time." His tone was dry but not entirely dismissive. He reached out, not towards her but towards her teacup, resting beside the jasmine. His fingertip traced the rim, a slow, deliberate circle. "Jasmine tea, an unusual choice. Not where I come from," she countered, a spark of defiance igniting within her. She met his gaze steadily. "Do you disapprove, Mr. Thorne, of the tea or the sunlight?" A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his austere features, gone so fast she might have imagined it. He picked up the teacup, examining it as if it were a rare artifact, not cheap porcelain. "Disapproval implies I care about the minor alterations to a disused room, Miss Hayes." He placed the cup down with deliberate care. "I merely observe. You seem determined to brighten things. Is brightness such a crime?" She tilted her head, a faint, challenging smile touching her lips. "Stonehaven is beautiful, Mr. Thorne, but even the most beautiful sculpture gathers dust without care. A little light shows it off to better advantage, don't you think?" He moved then, stepping closer to the glass wall, looking out towards the cliffs. "Light also reveals flaws, Miss Hayes. Cracks, imperfections best left concealed. Or perhaps," she said softly, standing and joining him at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance, "it reveals potential, things waiting to grow, like that garden." She nodded towards the tangled wilderness beyond the glass. "Underneath all those thorns, I suspect there are roses desperate for the sun." He turned his head, his dark eyes capturing hers. They were fathomless, holding storms she couldn't decipher. "Roses have thorns for a reason, Miss Hayes. Protection, a necessary defense." "Against what?" she asked, holding his gaze. "The gardener?" For a suspended moment, the flirtatious banter hung between them, a fragile, dangerous bridge over an abyss of unspoken history and raw, conflicting emotions. She saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of heat that burned away the ice before it was ruthlessly banked. "Against anything foolish enough to get too close," he replied, his voice dropping lower, rougher. He broke the gaze, turning back to the window, his posture rigid once more. "Enjoy your sunlight, Miss Hayes."
It's a fleeting commodity in Cornwall. He walked out, leaving the scent of sandalwood and unresolved tension swirling in the sun-warmed air. Celeste let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her heart hammered against her ribs, foolish enough to get too close. The warning was clear, yet the brief heat in his eyes felt like an invitation to precisely that foolishness. The weak sun had gained a little strength, bathing the overgrown space in a hazy golden light. The air was still, filled only with the drone of bees brave enough to venture out, and the distant rhythmic crash of the sea. Seeking peace, seeking to untangle the knot of feeling Alistair Thorne inspired, a confusing mix of wariness, sympathy, and an undeniable treacherous pull, Celeste had brought a blanket and a book. She'd settled beneath the skeletal branches of an old apple tree, its gnarled limbs casting intricate shadows. The combination of sun-warmed stone at her back and the gentle heat on her face was soporific. The anxieties, the intensity, the sheer weight of Stonehaven began to soften at the edges. The book slipped from her fingers, her head tilted back against the rough bark, a stray beam of sunlight warming her cheek like a caress. Sleep, light and dreamless, claimed her. Alistair found her like that. He'd come seeking the harsh bite of the sea air, the kind that scoured the mind clean. Instead, he walked into a scene of disarming tranquility. Celeste lay curled on her side on the tartan blanket, bathed in a pool of sunlight that seemed to emanate solely for her. Her dark lashes fanned against her cheeks, still bearing a faint flush from the sun. Her lips were slightly parted, soft and inviting in sleep. Her hair, usually neatly pinned, had loosened, a cascade of dark waves streaked with chestnut and gold tumbling over her shoulder, one strand catching on her lower lip. A single perfect white petal from a nearby snowdrop had drifted down, landing like a kiss on the crown of her head. He stopped dead, the scouring sea wind forgotten. The sight struck him with the force of a physical blow. So much innocence, so much unguarded vulnerability. An ache, profound and terrifying, bloomed in his chest. Not just desire, though that was a sharp, insistent thrum, but a desperate longing for the peace she seemed to embody, a peace utterly foreign to him. His hand, seemingly of its own volition, lifted. He wanted, more than he'd wanted anything in 5 desolate years, to brush that stray petal from her hair, to feel the silken weight of those dark strands against his skin, to trace the curve of her sun-warmed cheek. His fingers trembled inches from her head. The tremor was violent, uncontrollable. He clenched his fist, knuckles white. Elena. The name was a dagger in his heart. The memory surged, not of Elena sick and fading, but vibrant. Elena laughing in a sun-drenched meadow, a wildflower tucked behind her ear, turning to him with that same unguarded love shining in her eyes. The image superimposed itself over Celeste's sleeping face. Guilt, corrosive and immediate, flooded him. This was betrayal. Standing here, coveting the warmth of another woman while his wife's memory grew colder in this very stone, he was defiling Elena's sanctuary, drawn like a moth to a flame that promised only to consume him and everything he'd built to honor her. The peaceful garden scene curdled. The sunlight felt harsh, accusatory. The scent of damp earth and nascent growth suddenly choked him. He stumbled back, the movement clumsy, breaking a small twig underfoot. Celeste didn't stir, lost in her sunlit dreams, blissfully unaware of the storm of grief and guilt that had just raged over her. Alistair turned and fled, back towards the cold, sterile shadows of Stonehaven, the phantom warmth of her hair burning against his palm, the ghost of Elena's laughter echoing mockingly in his ears. The walls of his mausoleum felt thinner than ever, and the sunshine seeping through the cracks felt less like warmth and more like an unbearable, exposing glare. The unsettling calm was shattered, not by an external force, but by the violent tremors within his own fractured heart. The cracks were widening, and he had no idea how to shore them up against the relentless, terrifying Thor.
Chapter 2. The Thor Alistair Thorne feared wasn't a gentle spring. It was a slow, relentless seepage, finding every fissure in his meticulously constructed ice. Stonehaven, once echoing with the hollow silence of a tomb, now hummed with a low, insistent vibration, the rhythm of Celeste Hayes's presence. It wasn't loud, it was pervasive. The scent of her jasmine tea lingered long after she'd left a room, mingling treacherously with the familiar notes of lemon polish and old stone. Sunlight, once banished by heavy velvet, now striped the Persian rugs in the mornings, where she'd drawn back the curtains in the east-facing parlor. And laughter, Lily's bright, untethered giggles, often followed by Celeste's softer, warmer chuckle, echoed down corridors that hadn't known such sounds since Elena. Alistair felt it like a physical erosion. He'd find himself standing in the conservatory, inhaling the humid green scent she'd cultivated, staring not at the financial projections on his tablet, but at the tiny clay pot holding a single defiant violet she'd placed on the wrought iron table. Potential, she'd called it. He saw only vulnerability, a crack in the foundation. He'd retreat to his study, the sanctum where control was paramount, only to find the lingering trace of her, a faint floral note clinging to a cushion, the ghostly indent of her hip on the leather armchair where she sometimes read to Lily before bed. He'd press his palm against the warm leather, absorbing the phantom heat, a traitorous echo of the warmth he'd craved in the garden during that charged moment weeks ago. The memory flashed, her upturned face, the spark of challenge in her eyes, the unbearable pull he'd almost surrendered to. Now, it felt like a betrayal. Betrayal sharp and acidic, coated his tongue. He'd snatch his hand away, burying himself in columns of cold, hard numbers. But the numbers blurred. The scent of jasmine seemed to permeate the very parchment. Celeste felt the shift too, a subtle tilting of the ground beneath her feet. Her initial wariness towards Alistair Thorne hadn't vanished, but it was now overlaid with a bewildering complexity. His intensity wasn't just forbidding, it was magnetic. His dark eyes, when they weren't shuttered, held storms she felt an alarming urge to weather. And his retreats, like the one in the garden, spoke of wounds deeper than she could fathom. She wrestled constantly with the ethics of it. He was her employer, shrouded in grief and wealth, an impossible gulf between them. Yet the vulnerability she glimpsed, the tremor in his hand near her hair, the stark hunger quickly veiled, called to something reckless within her. To be seen by him, truly seen beyond the role of governess, felt terrifyingly alluring. But lately, that hunger seemed shadowed by something else, a withdrawal, a guilt that felt like a wall rebuilding itself just when she thought they'd bridged a gap. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the brooding atmosphere that seemed to emanate from Alistair's study, Celeste ventured into the walled garden again. Armed with borrowed shears and stubborn determination, she began attacking the brambles choking an ancient rose arbor. The physical exertion was cathartic. Sweat dampened the hair at her temples, dirt streaked her forearms, and her hands, protected by thin cotton gloves, still protested against the thorns and tough stems. She worked with focused energy, the rhythmic snip of the shears, the grunt of effort, the rustle of falling foliage filling the quiet space. "You seem intent on domesticating the wilderness, Miss Hayes." His voice, low and unexpectedly close, made her jump. She whirled, shears held aloft like a clumsy weapon. Alistair stood a few feet away, having approached silently. He wore no jacket, just a crisp white shirt rolled up at the forearms, revealing strong, surprisingly tanned wrists. He observed her efforts, his gaze sweeping over the pile of cuttings, then back to her flushed face and dirt-smudged cheek. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker in his dark eyes, assessment, perhaps, or something warmer. Celeste felt a familiar spark of hope, quickly tempered by caution. Was this the Alistair who had almost touched her hair, or the one who retreated behind stone walls? It had its chance to be wild, Mr. Thorne, she replied, lowering the shears, her breath slightly uneven. It chose thorns and neglect. I'm offering it a shot at something more cultivated. She met his gaze, a spark of challenge in her own. Beauty shouldn't have to fight quite so hard to be seen. One dark eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. Cultivation requires constant vigilance, pruning, control. He took a step closer, his gaze dropping to her gloved hands gripping the shears. It's demanding work, leaves its marks. He nodded towards her hands. She instinctively flexed them. The gloves hid the developing calluses, but the ache was there. Some marks are worth it, she countered, holding his gaze. The roses underneath deserve their chance to bloom, don't you think? Or do you prefer the thorns? A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but a seismic shift on his usually impassive face. Thorns serve a purpose, Miss Hayes. They protect the bloom from careless hands. His voice dropped slightly, taking on a gravelly undertone. Not everyone appreciates the fragility beneath. Some connections are best left unmade. The words were heavy, laced with a meaning that went far beyond roses. He was pushing her away, referencing the garden moment as a mistake. The warmth in his eyes cooled fractionally, replaced by a familiar guarded distance. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken. His proximity was overwhelming. She could smell the clean starch of his shirt, the underlying scent of sandalwood and salt, mixed now with the damp earth and crushed greenery. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was he talking about the roses, or Elena, or herself, or warning her off? Perhaps, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the sting of his implied rejection. Some hands aren't careless. Perhaps they're just willing to risk the scratches for the reward. She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to look away from the intensity of his stare. The flirtation was dangerous, a tightrope walk over an abyss she couldn't see the bottom of. He held her gaze for a long, suspended moment. She saw the conflict warring in his eyes, the pull towards the warmth she offered, the instinctive recoil into the safety of thorns, a recoil now fueled by clear regret. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze flickered down to her lips,
just for a fraction of a second, before snapping back up. A jolt of pure electricity shot through her, immediately followed by the cold certainty that he would not act on it. "Risk," he murmured, the word tasting the air between them, "is a luxury I cannot afford, Miss Hayes." The emphasis was deliberate, final. He took a deliberate step back, breaking the spell. "Carry on with your cultivation." He turned and walked back towards the house, leaving her standing amidst the hacked brambles, her skin tingling, her breath shallow, the phantom sensation of his nearness clinging like the scent of crushed rose leaves, and the bitter aftertaste of his self-imposed exile. The cracks weren't just widening in the garden, they were splintering the very routines of Stonehaven. Alistair found his rigid schedule subtly altered. Breakfast, once a solitary affair taken in the austere dining room with the morning financial news, was now often invaded by Lily's chatter and Celeste's quiet efficiency as she supervised the child's meal. Celeste had taken to placing a small jug of wildflowers, hardy little things she'd found clinging to life near the cliffs, on the heavy oak table. They were a shocking burst of color against the dark wood and starched linen, an absurdly cheerful rebellion. He'd glare at them, these tiny emblems of her relentless softening, a softening he had briefly, foolishly warmed to. Yet he found his coffee tasting less bitter on mornings they were there. The contradiction gnawed at him. He craved the light she brought Lily, yet feared its heat on his own frozen skin. He'd retreat to his study, the command center where he wielded control like a weapon. Spreadsheets glowed on his screen, complex mergers and acquisitions demanding his cold analytical focus. He'd force his mind into the familiar grooves, the ruthless calculus of profit and loss. But then it would start, a faint sound drifting through the heavy oak door left slightly ajar, another of her subtle changes, allowing air and light into his self-imposed crypt. Humming, soft, tuneless, and utterly distracting. Celeste's humming as she moved about the hall outside, perhaps arranging books Lily had left out, or talking gently to Mrs. Penhaligon about meals. It wasn't music, it was vibration, a low, warm thrum that seeped under his skin, unraveling his concentration thread by thread. It was the siren song of the life happening just beyond his door, a life he'd exiled himself from, but which now persistently called him back. He remembered the dangerous pull of her nearness in the garden, the flicker of desire he had vowed to suppress. The hum felt like a taunt, a reminder of the connection he was forcing himself to reject. He'd slammed the door shut, the sound echoing harshly, but the silence that followed felt colder, emptier, amplifying the phantom hum still resonating in his bones. The storm rolled in off the Atlantic with little warning. One moment, the late afternoon light was fading peacefully over the cliffs. The next, bruised purple clouds bruised the horizon, and the wind began to keen around Stonehaven's granite towers like a banshee. Rain lashed the windows, a furious drumming against the glass. Alistair was in the library, attempting to review a critical contract amidst the rising fury outside, when the door burst open. Lily stood there, eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear, clutching a sodden stuffed rabbit. "Papa, the thunder, it's so loud." Before he could formulate a response, his instinct was to offer a stiff reassurance from his chair. Celeste appeared behind Lily, equally drenched. She must have been caught outside. Her dark hair was plastered to her head and neck, her simple dress clinging to her form, water dripping onto the priceless Persian rug. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, not with fear, but with a kind of exhilaration. "There you are, little storm chaser." Celeste laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to push back against the howling wind. She scooped Lily up, heedless of the water transferring to her own already soaked clothes. "Did you see that flash? Like the sky cracked open." Alistair rose, a protest about the rug dying on his lips as he took in the scene. Celeste, dripping and disheveled, holding his wide-eyed daughter, radiating an infectious, fearless energy that was utterly alien to the damp, shadowed room. Rainwater streamed down her face, tracing paths over her skin. Lily, momentarily distracted from her fear, giggled, pointing at the window as another lightning fork illuminated the room in stark blue-white light. Celeste turned her rain-slicked face towards Alistair, her laughter softening into a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "See, nothing to fear, just the world having a grand old wash." She shifted Lily on her hip. "Though perhaps we should get this little explorer dried off before she turns into a proper water sprite." He stood rooted, transfixed. The controlled chaos of the storm outside seemed mirrored in the untamed vitality before him. Celeste, soaked and laughing, was life incarnate, unapologetic and vibrant against the backdrop of his static, rain-lashed world. He felt an absurd impulse to step closer, to feel the chill of the rain on her skin, to taste the salt on her lips where the rain had touched them. The intensity of the desire shocked him, a physical ache deep in his chest, a treacherous echo of the connection he'd forbidden himself. He clenched his jaw, forcing his gaze away, towards the window where the storm raged. The rain blurred the glass, mirroring the blurring of his own rigid boundaries. He couldn't afford this. Not again. The guilt, sharp as a shard of ice, pierced the heat of his longing. When he looked back, Celeste was already heading towards the door, murmuring comforting nonsense to Lily about warm towels and hot chocolate. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at him. Her smile was still there, gentle now, understanding, but with a hint of sadness, as if she sensed the battle raging within him. "Don't work too late, Mr. Thorne. Even storms need to rest eventually." Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of rain, wet wool, and the lingering echo of her laughter in the charged air. He remained standing long after the door closed. The thunder boomed again, shaking the old house. He didn't flinch. He felt the vibration travel up through the stone floor, resonate in his chest. And then he felt something else, a treacherous warmth spreading beneath the chill, a saltiness on his own lips that wasn't rain. He lifted a hand, brushing his cheekbone. His fingertips came away wet. Not rain. The unshed tears he'd banked for 5 years, loosened by the sheer, terrifying force of her laughter in the storm, and the crushing weight of denying the response it demanded. He turned his face fully towards the window, letting the fury of the elements mirror the tempest within him, the salt of his grief and guilt mingling invisibly with the salt-laden rain streaking the glass. The puppy was pure, unadulterated chaos on 4 ridiculously oversized paws. A ball of golden fluff with ears too big for its head and eyes like melted chocolate, it tumbled into Stonehaven's somber halls one crisp morning, trailing a length of blue ribbon and an ecstatic lily. Celeste followed, her expression a mixture of apprehension and defiant hope. Look what Miss Hayes brought. His name is Sonny," Lily shrieked, skidding to a halt on the polished floor of the grand entrance hall, the puppy scrambling gamely beside her, its tiny claws clicking frantically. Alistair, descending the stairs, froze mid-step. His face, already set in its usual stern lines, hardened into granite. "A dog," his voice was ice. "Miss Hayes, what is the meaning of this? Stonehaven is not a menagerie. The disruption, the mess, the responsibility." His gaze swept over the wriggling creature, then fixed on Celeste with accusatory intensity. The cracks were threatening to become chasms. This was an invasion, a deliberate sabotage of his ordered world. He saw the flinch in her posture, the way her knuckles whitened where she gripped the end of the trailing ribbon. Her hands, he noticed them again, even in his anger. The calluses from the garden were visible now, small badges of her persistent efforts to cultivate life where he fostered only stasis. Yet, he knew the gentleness in those hands, tucking Lily in, brushing hair from a child's forehead, sketching delicate veins on a leaf. Hands he had almost reached for, hands he must not touch. "Please, Papa." Lily's voice was small now, wobbling. She clutched the puppy tighter. Sonny responded by licking her chin enthusiastically, eliciting a hiccuping giggle that was half sob. "He's all alone, like I was before Miss Hayes." The words, simple and devastating, struck Alistair like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her. The pure, unadulterated joy on her face as the puppy nuzzled her neck. The light in her eyes that hadn't been there months ago. The echo of her loneliness before Celeste arrived resonated painfully within his own hollow core. His protest about contracts, board meetings, the impossibility of a dog, died in his throat, suffocated by the sight of Lily's happiness, and the quiet, pleading defiance in Celeste's eyes. She hadn't asked permission. She'd acted. For Lily. A reckless, messy act of pure, uncalculated love. An act that mirrored the warmth he was trying to extinguish within himself. He said nothing. He couldn't trust his voice. He simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze locked not on Lily or the puppy, but on Celeste. The silent concession was more powerful than any shouted decree. He turned abruptly and walked away, back towards the sterile refuge of his study, the sound of Lily's delighted squeals and the puppy's excited yaps following him like a taunt.
He didn't retreat to regain control. He fled from the terrifying magnitude of his own surrender to the life she insisted on bringing in, a surrender that felt like another step towards the intimacy he feared and condemned himself for wanting. Later, much later, when the house had settled into a semblance of quiet, Alistair found he couldn't work. The silence was different now. It wasn't the old heavy silence of absence, but a waiting silence, filled with the ghostly echoes of laughter and puppy breath. He wandered downstairs, drawn by an impulse he refused to name. The drawing-room door was slightly ajar. Soft lamplight spilled into the hallway. He peered in. Celeste was asleep on the large, overstuffed sofa, bathed in the warm pool of light from a single lamp. Her hair was loose, cascading over one armrest. One hand rested limply on the floor, fingers loosely curled, and curled tightly against her side, a small golden ball of fur, was Sonny. The puppy was fast asleep, nose tucked under its tail, rising and falling with deep, contented puppy breaths. One tiny paw rested possessively on Celeste's arm. The sight stole Alistair's breath. The fierce governess, the thorn in his side, the catalyst of chaos, lay utterly vulnerable in sleep. The calloused hand that battled brambles lay relaxed, inches from the soft, trusting creature she'd brought into their fractured world. The lamplight gilded her skin, softened the lines of fatigue around her eyes. She looked peaceful, impossibly young. The puppy, a symbol of the disruption he feared, looked like nothing more than a perfect, trusting piece of warmth nestled against her,
The fierce protectiveness that had roared to life when he saw her laughing in the rain surged again, hotter, more primal. It wasn't just desire, it was a terrifying need to shelter this warmth, this chaotic, life-giving force. It was the same pull he'd felt in the garden, amplified tenfold by her vulnerability. He moved silently into the room, his footsteps soundless on the thick rug. He stood over her for a long moment, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, the flutter of her eyelashes against her cheek. The scent of her, vanilla and jasmine, and the clean, milky smell of the puppy enveloped him. He saw the cashmere throw folded neatly over the back of a nearby armchair, one of his own discarded days ago. He picked it up, the wool soft and cool in his hands. Moving with infinite care, he draped it over her sleeping form, tucking it gently around her shoulders and the sleeping puppy. His fingers, inevitably, brushed the bare skin of her wrist as he adjusted the blanket. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation shot up his arm, a lightning strike of heat and awareness that rooted him to the spot. Her skin was warm, incredibly soft. He felt the delicate tracery of veins beneath his fingertips, the steady pulse point beating a rapid rhythm against his touch. He froze, transfixed, his breath catching. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, the feel of her living warmth beneath his fingers, the scent of her filling his senses, the sight of her sleeping face inches away. He wanted to sink to his knees. He wanted to trace the line of her jaw, bury his face in the curve of her neck, breathe her in until the cold within him melted completely. The desire was overwhelming, a tidal wave threatening to drown the barriers he'd painstakingly rebuilt since the garden. Panic, raw and instinctive, seized him, too close, too real, too much like the surrender he'd sworn against. The memory of her challenge, her willingness to risk the scratches, flooded back, a risk he had initiated and then rejected. The ghosts of Elena and his own suffocating guilt rose like a choking fog, reminding him of the betrayal inherent in this touch, this longing. He snatched his hand back as if burned, the phantom warmth of her skin searing his fingertips. He stumbled back a step, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He couldn't look away from her, yet he couldn't stay. The blanket was there, covering her, his blanket, his scent now mingling with hers. A flag planted on territory he couldn't claim, wouldn't allow himself to claim. A symbol of care he had no right to offer, not when every touch felt like a trespass against his own vows. He turned and fled the room, leaving the soft lamplight, the sleeping woman, the trusting puppy, and his own discarded cashmere throw, a silent, damning testament to the warmth he craved, and the chaos he feared was already irrevocably claiming him. The cracks weren't just widening, they were swallowing him whole. The control he'd wielded like a shield lay in tatters at his feet, and all he could do was run from the terrifying, radiant vulnerability he'd just covered with his own touch, and the devastating guilt that followed in its wake.
Chapter 3. The pressure building within Stonehaven's granite walls had ceased to be a subtle seepage. It was now a tectonic grind, a deep, ominous rumble felt in the marrow. The warmth Celeste had cultivated felt increasingly like a fragile bloom trapped beneath advancing ice. Alistair Thorne felt the strain like a physical weight, bowing his shoulders, the meticulously constructed dam holding back a torrent of forbidden feeling groaning under the pressure. Memories of her skin beneath his fingers in the garden, the playful spark in her eyes during their charged exchanges, the devastating intimacy of covering her with his blanket, they haunted him, fueling a desperate, guilty hunger he could no longer deny. The first fissure appeared, not from within, but from without. Julian Vance and his associates arrived, their presence a cold shock to Stonehaven's newfound warmth. Vance's insinuations about Celeste being a distraction, a vulnerable employee, weaponizing her undeniable impact, struck with brutal precision. Alistair felt a familiar, glacial rage, but beneath it surged something more dangerous, panic, and the terrifying echo of his own guilt. Was Vance right? Was his desperate, consuming desire for Celeste making him weak, jeopardizing everything? He dismissed them with icy fury, but Vance's words echoed, distracted, unfocused, vulnerable employee, demonstrate unequivocal control. Control, the very thing obliterated every time he recalled the brush of his thumb against Celeste's lip in the garden, the soft gasp she'd made, the way her eyes had darkened with the same heat that now burned relentlessly within him. He picked up Lily's painted stone, its childish vibrancy mocking the icy dread solidifying in his gut. The pressure behind his eyes tightened into a vicious vice. The migraine was a brutal onslaught. By late afternoon, it was a crushing weight behind his right eye, synchronized with the relentless waves. He'd locked himself in his study, plunged into twilight thick with pain and the specter of Vance's threats. Control. He needed it. But the pain shredded his thoughts, leaving only raw vulnerability and the phantom sensation of Celeste's skin, warm and soft beneath his touch. A soft knock pierced the throbbing haze, then the key turning. Celeste. The door opened, spilling painful light. He flinched, groaning. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice, soft with concern, cut through the pounding. She stepped inside, closed the door, plunging them into near darkness lit only by dying embers. Her silhouette approached. "Migraine," he managed a grunt. "Go away. Please, don't see me like this." Especially not when the memory of her playful defiance, her willingness to risk the scratches, made his blood sing even through the pain. He felt her warmth beside him, the faint, sweet scent of vanilla, jasmine, and now lavender, a minor assault, yet a point of focus. "Light hurts," she murmured. She banked the embers, deepening the gloom to a faint red glow. Relief, infinitesimal but real. He heard her kneel. He risked opening his eyes a slit. Her face was close, haloed in ember light, soft with worry, achingly beautiful, stirring memories of sunlight on her skin in the garden. "Here," she whispered. Her fingers, blessedly cool, touched his temples. He jerked. She soothed, her voice a low hum. The sound vibrated through him, recalling her laughter in the storm, the hum outside his door, sounds that had become synonymous with forbidden longing. Her fingertips began slow, gentle circles, lavender oil scenting the air, blissful pressure. He let out a shuddering sigh, surrendering to the ministrations. Her touch was exquisite agony, a lifeline. He closed his eyes, focusing on the cool points, the rhythm, her intoxicating scent. Her breath whispered against his cheek as she leaned closer. The rasp, soft and intimate, sent a different jolt through him, a bolt of pure sexual awareness that momentarily eclipsed the pain. He remembered leaning close like this before, the electric charge between them. "Does this help at all?" she asked, barely audible. "God, yes," he rasped, the raw need startling them both. Her fingers stilled fractionally, then resumed. Her thumb swept along his hairline, down to the tense muscles at his nape. A low groan escaped him. Pain, yes, but primarily the visceral reaction to her touch, the same touch he'd craved for weeks. "You carry everything here," she murmured, fingers working the knots. "The weight of the world, and Stonehaven." Her breath feathered against his ear. "You need to learn to put it down sometimes, Mr. Thorne. Even Atlas needed a rest." The use of his formal name, coupled with the devastating intimacy of her touch, her breath, her words, shattered the last remnants of the dam. The ice melted under the sheer heat of his desire. The carefully maintained distance evaporated. He turned his head, his cheek finding her wrist. Her pulse fluttered rapidly against his skin, a frantic rhythm that matched the desperate thrum of his own blood, pooling hot and heavy low in his belly. Celeste. Her name was a ragged whisper, a plea, a confession torn from the depths. He opened his eyes. In the dim glow, her face was inches from his. Her eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting firelight, and an unmistakable answering hunger, a mirror to the desperate need that had haunted his every thought since their first charged encounter. The playful flirtation, the tender touch, the shared heat, it was all there, laid bare between them. The air crackled, thick with unsaid words, and the thunderous pounding of his blood. Vance's demand for control was ash, his hand lifted, driven by pure instinctive need, not for the first time, but now with shattering inevitability. His trembling fingers brushed her cheek. She didn't flinch. She leaned infinitesimally into the touch, eyes fluttering shut, a soft sigh escaping. The sound was a catalyst. Emboldened, terrified, consumed, he cupped her face, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbone, a path it had longed to retrace since the garden, then drifting lower, feather-light, across the fullness of her lower lip. The touch was electric. Her lips were soft, yielding beneath his thumb. He felt her breath hitch, warm against his skin. The memory of almost tasting her surged, potent and overwhelming. Alistair, his name on her lips was a benediction and a condemnation, a sound he'd fantasized about in the darkest, guiltiest hours. The sound shattered the fragile moment. She startled. Her elbow knocked the forgotten teacup. It shattered on the stone floor, a sharp, final gunshot. They froze. The spell fractured. Reality flooded back. The shattered cup, their intimate position, Vance's warning, and the crushing weight of Elena's memory. He didn't remove his hand. His thumb still rested against her lower lip, burning, his gaze locked with hers, filled with a storm of fear, raging desire, guilt, longing, and despair. The words clawed their way up, raw and stripped bare, a confession torn for her and the ghosts. "I can't lose you both," he whispered, the sound ragged, broken. The word hung, a plea to the woman whose face he cradled with desperate tenderness, whose lips trembled beneath his thumb, and whose body he ached to pull against his own, and a desperate apology to the spectral memory of the wife whose sanctuary he felt crumbling under the force of this undeniable, terrifying passion.
The breaking point wasn't just reached, it was obliterated, leaving only the jagged edges of his control, the terrifying uncharted territory of surrender, and the white-hot, guilty fire of a desire he could no longer contain. Chapter 4. The silence after the teacup shattered wasn't empty. It was thick, charged, vibrating with the echo of Alistair's raw confession and the sharp finality of breaking porcelain. Celeste remained frozen on her knees beside his chair, his hand still cupping her face, his thumb a brand against her lower lip. His eyes, wide and dark in the ember-lit gloom, held hers, a storm-tossed sea of fear, guilt, longing, and a despair so profound it stole her breath. "I can't lose you both," the words hung between them, a bridge built of splintered ice and desperate hope, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped against the cage of his confession. Both Elena and her, he'd lumped them together in his terror, a terrifying, sacred admission. The fragile barrier of employer and employee, the careful dance of propriety, lay in shards on the floor with the porcelain. What remained was terrifyingly simple, a man and a woman, stripped bare by pain and longing. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her own hand. It trembled, mirroring his. She didn't push him away. Instead, her fingers closed over his wrist, feeling the frantic pulse beneath his skin, anchoring him, anchoring herself. Her thumb traced the tense tendons, a silent counterpoint to his touch on her lip. "Alistair," she breathed, his name a soft exhalation, tasting the unfamiliar intimacy of it. "You haven't lost her." Her gaze held his, unflinching. "And you won't lose me." The promise was reckless, born in the heat of the moment, yet it felt like the only truth in the shattered room. "Not unless you push me away, not unless you choose the tomb over the tide." He flinched as if struck, his eyes squeezing shut for a moment. When they opened, the storm hadn't abated, but a new intensity burned within it. His thumb moved again, a barely there caress along her lip. "The tide is chaos, Celeste," he rasped, his voice scraped raw. "It destroys as much as it nourishes. And the tomb is just death," she countered softly, leaning infinitesimally further into his touch. "Slow, cold death, for you, for Lily, for Stonehaven." She tilted her head, catching the faint ember glow in her eyes. "Are you really so afraid of a little chaos, Mr. Thorne? Especially when it comes with—" She paused, a ghost of her old defiance flickering. "Sunlight and puppies." A sound escaped him, part groan, part disbelieving laugh, choked by the lingering pain, and the sheer terrifying absurdity of her words in this moment. "Sunlight and puppies," he echoed, his thumb stilling. "Is that your weapon of choice against granite and grief?" "It's a start," she whispered, a tentative smile touching her lips beneath his thumb. "Along with lavender oil, and perhaps," she took a shallow breath, the air crackling between them, "someone willing to risk the scratches for the bloom." His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes, the conflict raging anew, but the fear was now mingled with a dawning, desperate hope. He didn't move to kiss her, not yet. The intimacy was too new, the ground too treacherous, but his hand shifted, sliding from her cheek to cradle the back of her neck, his fingers tangling gently in the hair at her nape. He pulled her forward, slowly, until her forehead rested against his. The contact was electric, a point of pure connection. He closed his eyes, breathing her in, lavender, vanilla, the faint salt of her tears or his, he couldn't tell. Her breath mingled with his, warm and vital against his skin. "Chaos," he murmured against her brow, the word a surrender, a plea, a promise. The dam didn't just crack, it dissolved. The ice melted not in a trickle, but in a flood, carrying away the rigid structures of his control. He didn't rebuild them, he let the tide take them. The days that followed were not magically easy. Vance's threat still loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. The Pendleton merger demanded ruthless focus, but something fundamental had shifted within Stonehaven, and within its master. Alistair still worked long hours, but the study door often remained open. Spreadsheets no longer blurred. He attacked them with a renewed, almost ferocious clarity, not driven by icy control, but by a fierce protectiveness. He was fighting for something tangible now, something warm and breathing within these stone walls, not just a monument to the past. Celeste felt the change like sunlight after a long winter. The air in Stonehaven seemed lighter, easier to breathe. Alistair's gaze, when it found hers, still held intensity, but the constant wiriness, the instinctive recoil, had softened into something warmer, more open. There was a new ease between them, a tentative exploration of the intimacy forged in the shadowed study. One crisp morning, she found him in the conservatory, frowning at her thriving jasmine plant. He wore a dark sweater instead of his usual suit jacket, his sleeves pushed up. Sunny lay sprawled at his feet, gnawing contentedly on a stolen slipper. "Contemplating horticulture, Mr. Thorne?" Celeste asked, leaning against the doorframe, a tray with 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "Or just judging my parenting skills with the jasmine?" He turned, the frown easing as he saw her. A faint smile touched his lips, a sight that still sent a little thrill through her. Merely observing its alarming rate of growth, it seems determined to take over this glass cage. Much like its owner, he accepted the mug she offered, his fingers brushing hers. The deliberate contact sent a warm spark up her arm. "Thank you. Blame the Cornish air." she said lightly, moving to stand beside him at the window overlooking the still wild walled garden. Or perhaps it just finally feels safe to stretch its leaves. She sipped her tea, watching him. Unlike some, he raised an eyebrow, sipping his own tea. Are you implying I'm not stretching my leaves, Miss Hayes? Oh, I've seen evidence of some unfurling, she teased, nodding towards the open curtains throughout the house, the faint sound of Lily's piano practice drifting from the music room, a room that had been silent for years. But the garden remains a formidable thicket. One might think you enjoy the thorns. He followed her gaze to the tangled wilderness. Thorns are predictable, he said, his voice dropping slightly, controlled. Unlike, he gestured vaguely towards Sunny, who had abandoned the slipper and was now attempting to climb Alistair's leg. Rampaging beasts. Celeste laughed, the sound bright and clear in the sunlit space. Sunny is hardly a beast. He's a force of nature, like the tide. She nudged Alistair's arm playfully with her elbow. Perhaps you need a little rampaging in your life. Keeps things interesting. He looked down at her, the sunlight catching the gold flecks in his dark eyes. The intensity was still there, but now it was laced with warmth, with a burgeoning playfulness that matched her own. Interesting, he echoed, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips. Is that what you call it? I believe my Persian rug has another term for Sunny's brand of interesting. Details. Celeste waved a dismissive hand, though her cheeks flushed under his gaze. A small price for joy. And look, she pointed as Lily appeared at the garden door, calling for Sunny. The puppy abandoned Alistair's leg with a joyful yip and bounded towards the child. He brings sunshine, literally, in his case. Alistair watched Lily scoop up the wriggling puppy, her laughter echoing. A profound tenderness softened his features. He does, he admitted quietly. Then he turned back to Celeste, his expression shifting, becoming more serious, more intent. He set his mug down. Speaking of sunshine, and thorns, and things that need cultivating, he took a deep breath, a flicker of uncharacteristic nervousness crossing his face. Celeste Hayes, he began, his voice low and rough with emotion. You stormed into this tomb and demanded life. You battled the thorns, planted wildflowers in the cracks, and forced light into the darkest corners. You brought laughter back to Lily, chaos in the form of Sunny, and... He paused, his gaze holding hers with unwavering intensity. You brought me back, from the edge of stone. He reached into his pocket, not for folded paper this time, but for a small velvet box. He opened it. Nestled inside was a ring, not a massive diamond, but a beautiful, unique piece. The band was platinum, twisted like a vine. At its center sat a single brilliant diamond flanked by two smaller vibrant amethysts. Amethyst, he said softly, for the wildflowers you love. Diamond, for the strength I see in you every day. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. I am weary of tombs, Celeste. I surrender to the tide, wholly, completely. He sank to one knee on the sun-warmed tiles of the conservatory. Will you build a life with me? Not as governess, but as my partner, my wife. Will you marry me, Celeste? Celeste stared, utterly breathless. The ring glittered in the sunlight, a perfect symbol of his transformation, strength intertwined with wild beauty. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the powerful man kneeling before her, offering his heart, his future, his very name. Yes, she whispered, the word catching in her throat. Oh, Alistair, yes. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him up as he stood, laughing through her tears. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, sealing the promise amidst the scent of jasmine and tea, with Lily's delighted squeal echoing from the garden as she witnessed the scene through the glass. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, a cool, beautiful weight, a tangible symbol of the life they would forge. Mrs. Thorne, he murmured against her lips, the words tasting like sunshine and forever. Their wedding was a reflection of their journey, intimate, defiantly joyful, rooted in the life they were reclaiming together. They married a month later, not in a grand cathedral, but in the heart of Stonehaven, the walled garden, now partially tamed, bursting with the first brave blooms of early summer roses, lavender, and the wild Cornish heather Celeste adored. Sunny, adorned with a blue ribbon collar, served as the enthusiastic, slightly chaotic ring-bearer. Lily, radiant in a simple yellow dress, scattered petals from a basket woven by Mrs. Penhaligon. The housekeeper herself wept happy tears, standing beside a beaming Dr. Evans from the village, who officiated. A handful of Alistair's most trusted allies from London witnessed the quiet ceremony, their initial surprise melting into genuine warmth at the sight of Alistair Thorne, transformed, his eyes only for his bride. Celeste wore not white silk, but a gown of soft sea-green linen that flowed around her, simple yet elegant. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of wild flowers picked from the cliffs and the garden, purple heather, sprigs of rosemary for remembrance, and delicate white sea thrift. Her amethyst ring caught the sunlight. Alistair, in a dark suit but no tie, his eyes suspiciously bright, watched her walk towards him on the newly cleared garden path. When he took her hands, his was steady, sure. His vows were not flowery pronouncements, but solemn, heartfelt promises, spoken in a voice thick with emotion, to cherish her strength, to embrace the chaos, to stand by her side in sunlight and storm, to love Lily as his own, and to build a life together within the walls they were healing. Celeste's vows echoed his, to be his sanctuary, his partner in cultivating joy, to love him fiercely through thorns and blooms, and to always believe in the life they could create. As Dr. Evans pronounced them husband and wife, Alistair didn't wait. He pulled Celeste into his arms and kissed her deeply, a kiss that spoke of passion, relief, and a profound hard-won peace. Lily cheered, Sunny barked, and the small gathering applauded, the sound mingling with the buzzing of bees in the lavender and the distant sigh of the sea. Stonehaven, bathed in golden afternoon light, seemed to exhale, its stones warming to the undeniable truth. It had a mistress, a family, a future. The transformation of Stonehaven deepened, infused now with the certainty of their union. Celeste's paintings, vibrant watercolors of the cliffs, the sea, wild flowers, Sunny's ridiculous face, appeared on walls in simple frames. Alistair hung himself, often slightly askew. The piano in the music room echoed not just with Lily's scales, but with duets. Alistair, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, would sit beside Celeste, their shoulders brushing as they picked out melodies together. Sometimes it was a halting folk tune, sometimes a fragment of something classical Celeste taught him. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It was theirs. Sunny, a beloved, if occasionally slipper-stealing, member of the family, left trails of sandy paw prints. Mrs. Penhaligon baked extra biscuits for the family, her eyes crinkling with warmth. The wild garden continued its metamorphosis under Celeste's guidance, but Alistair was now an ardent, if occasionally clumsy, participant. One Saturday morning found them wrestling a particularly stubborn root ball for a new climbing rose. Dirt smeared his expensive sweater and streaked his cheek. "You know," Celeste remarked, wiping sweat from her brow with a dirty hand, leaving an earthy smudge. "For a man who built an empire on cold calculation, you have a surprising aptitude for brute force gardening." He straightened, pushing a lock of hair slightly too long now from his forehead, adding another streak of dirt. "Brute force, Mrs. Thorne," he countered, a playful glint in his eye as he used her new name. "I prefer to think of it as strategic excavation." He gestured towards the hole. "Precision is still key. Depth, angle, soil composition." "Ah, yes," she grinned, handing him the rose bush. "The complex algorithms of horticulture. Clearly I'm out of my depth." She watched him carefully position the roots. "Though I must say, Mr. Thorne, dirt suits you. Takes the edge off the terrifying financier vibe." He shot her a mock scowl that couldn't hide his affection. "Terrifying? I thought we'd established I was merely predictable, prone to tombs and thorns." "You were," she agreed, stepping closer to steady the bush as he backfilled the soil. Her arm brushed his. "Now you're predictable only in your uncanny ability to find the muddiest patch in any garden." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And your sneaky habit of stealing the last biscuit." He paused, trowel in hand, a genuine laugh rumbling in his chest. "Guilty as charged," he admitted, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then back up, holding hers. The air hummed with familiar electricity. "Though," he added, his voice dropping to a low murmur, "I seem to recall a certain wife distracting me with wildflower metaphors at a critical juncture. Potentially biscuit-related amnesia." "Wildflower metaphors are a legitimate tactical tool," she retorted, her cheeks flushing, "especially against financiers with biscuit-hoarding tendencies." She brushed a stray clump of soil from his shoulder, her fingers lingering. "Besides, you look like you need the sustenance. All this strategic excavation is clearly exhausting." He caught her hand, his dirt-streaked fingers curling around hers, the amethyst ring gleaming. "Perhaps," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "what I need is a different kind of sustenance." He pulled her gently closer, ignoring the mud, the thorns, the world beyond their patch of earth. The kiss, when it came, was tender, earthy, tasting of tea and soil, and the deep contentment of vows fulfilled. It was a kiss that spoke of roots digging deep, of blooms yet to come, of a shared life embraced, thorns and all. The rain started softly, a gentle pattering on the conservatory roof, as dusk painted the sky. Celeste stood at the window, watching the droplets trace paths down the glass, reflecting the warm lamplight within. She wore one of Elena's old sweaters, a soft dove-grey cashmere Alistair had given her. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme, but now, mostly of her. She felt him before she saw him, a shift in the air, the familiar scent of sandalwood and salt. He came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, pulling her snug against him. She leaned back, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. They watched the rain, the silence comfortable, filled with its rhythm and Sunny's soft snores. "It's just rain," he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. "No thunder, no banshee wind, just the world having a gentle wash," she echoed, turning in his arms to face him. She looped her hands around his neck, her wedding ring cool against his skin. "See, nothing to fear." He rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't afraid of the storm, Celeste," he said quietly. "I was afraid of the lightning of feeling, the lightning strike of her touch."
He didn't need to say it. She knew. And now, she asked softly. Now, he whispered, his hands sliding up her back, pulling her closer. I find I cherish the illumination. He brushed his lips against hers, a tender promise. Even when it's blinding.
He paused, a soft smile touching his lips. Dance with me, Mrs. Thorne. She smiled, the warmth of the name spreading through her. There's no music. Who needs music? He countered, echoing her old challenge, a newfound lightness in his voice. He took one of her hands in his, placed the other firmly on her waist. Just the rain. Just us. He began to move, a slow swaying step, guiding her this time. He was less stiff now, more confident in this unscripted intimacy. They moved together in the quiet conservatory, the only sound the gentle percussion of rain and the soft scuff of their feet. No grand ballroom, no orchestra, just the perfect harmony of husband and wife, finding their rhythm amidst the quiet fall of rain. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing him in. His hand tightened on her waist, his lips brushed her hair. This, he murmured against her temple, his voice thick with love, is the only tide I ever want to surrender to. It's not chaos, Alistair, she whispered back, her heart overflowing. It's just our life. Beautiful, messy, imperfect, married life. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. Our forever. He stopped swaying, cupping her face in his hands. The love in his eyes was a deep, steady sea. Ours, he affirmed, the word a vow renewed. Then he kissed her, deeply, slowly, as the rain whispered secrets against the glass, and the warmth of their shared future, now sanctified by vows, soaked into the ancient stones of Stonehaven. Months later, on a day when the Atlantic roared its fiercest song, they stood together on the cliff path. Alistair Thorne, his wife Celeste, and Lily, bundled against the wind and salt spray, with Sunny darting excitedly at their feet, barking at the gulls. The storm was outside now, a magnificent fury they observed from a place of deep, hard-won peace, a peace sealed by vows and rings. Celeste stood slightly ahead, her profile etched against the dramatic seascape. The wind whipped strands of dark hair free from her hood, coloring her cheeks. Her hands rested gently on the pronounced swell of her belly beneath her thick coat. New life, a new storm brewing within the calm of their marriage. Alistair stepped up behind his wife, not to shelter her from the wind, but to share the view, the solidity of their union, their true shelter. He wrapped his arms around her, his large hands splayed protectively over hers where they cradled their unborn child. His wedding band gleamed against the dark wool of her coat. He rested his chin on her shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of her, the incredible proof of their future pressing against him. Lily leaned into his side, her small hand finding his, her eyes wide with awe. Stonehaven stood strong behind them, no longer a sepulchre, but a home, a testament to love reclaimed. Its windows blazed with light, smoke curled from its chimneys. Inside, Celeste's paintings adorned the walls. Wildflowers stood in jam jars, the scent of baking bread and jasmine tea mingled, and the hopeful notes of Lily's piano practice drifted on the wind, harmonizing with the sea's roar and the quiet certainty of their vows. Alistair pressed a kiss against Celeste's wind-chilled temple. His hand shifted slightly on her belly, feeling the powerful kick of their child, a new tide within their forever tide. He thought of the journal entry, the words now a peaceful benediction rather than a struggle. Eleanor, I carry you both, always, but my heart has found its breadth, its wild, terrifying, beautiful forever, with my wife. He held Celeste tighter, feeling the life within her kick again. He looked out at the churning water, the endless horizon, then down at the woman who was his partner, his love, his wife. The tide had come in, it had reshaped everything, and he stood, not on the crumbling edge of a cliff, but on the solid, sun-warmed shore of a future he'd vowed to share, ready for the next beautiful, chaotic, life-giving wave, forever hand in hand with Celeste Thorne.